With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
Survivor 46 is here, and so is On Fire, the only official Survivor podcast, and we have a twist this season. The winner of Survivor 45, Dee Valladares, will be joining us every week.
We're going behind the scenes of the biggest moments, the how and the why things happen, and the strategy and analysis you can only get from someone like me, a Survivor winner.
Listen to On Fire, the official Survivor podcast, wherever you get your podcast.
Hey there! Did you know Baker's always gives you savings and rewards on top of our lower than low prices? And when you download the Baker's app, you'll enjoy over $500 in savings every week with digital coupons. And don't forget fuel points to help you save up to $1 per gallon at the pump. Want to save even more? With a Boost membership, you'll get double fuel points and free delivery. So shop and save big at Baker's today. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Savings may vary by state. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
She was the first British woman to win 5 Olympic medals at 5 successive Olympic Games. Along with 4 silvers, the gold was won at Eton Dorney during London 2012 and alongside Anna Watkins. It was one of the standout moments of these standout Olympic Games. I'm Michael.
And I'm John. And after retiring from competitive rowing following Rio 2016, there was a damehood and an appointment to lead the organisation that's responsible for the high-performance sporting system in this country and delivering on a new strategy for more sporting success. She also has her own podcast called Medals and More, which I'm told is very good. But today we're honoured to have her as our 50th guest on Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy.
Thank you, guys. I'm Katherine Grainger, and I am the chair of UK Sport.
Katherine, it's great to have you. We've waited 49 episodes to get you on, so it's brilliant to have you, the chair of UK Sport, as our 50th guest on Great British Bosses. What does the chair of UK Sport do then?
It's a very good question, and one I ask myself most days, to be fair. I've been at it now for 5 years, so I should know. I should have a quick answer to that. For those who don't know, UK Sport is an arm's length government body. It's the body that basically works with all the Olympic and Paralympic British sports. So we do a mixture of supporting all the athletes, investing in the national governing bodies that sort of oversee those sports, and also invest in major events that are hosted in this country. But as the chair of it, I have to say there's no such thing as a normal day. So every day I'll be dealing with a wide range of things. And although I was a funded athlete for a very long time, so I felt I knew UK Sport, it wasn't until I came into this role that I had any idea of the sort of scale and breadth and depth that happens in the organisation. So it's been a very steep learning curve, and it's probably every day still a school day, if I'm honest.
Who wooed who when it comes to becoming the chair of UK Sport? Was it something you had to apply for and sit through various interviews and boards to get, or did they come looking for you?
Oh no, I definitely had to. I had to sort of claw my way in. So I kind of, if I'm honest, it was I'd finished the end of my rowing career in Rio in 2016. You know, I've been an athlete for a very, very long time, and I think, all athletes talk quite publicly about this step away from their sport is a hard step. Even if I'd had a incredibly positive career, I'd love being an athlete. I knew it was sort of time to end, but it's still hard to make that final adjustment. And I kind of had to accept that I would have to be something other than an athlete, and I didn't know what that was going to be, and I didn't really have any plans or sort of clear roles in mind. But I knew I had to sort of get myself in the place where I could start applying for jobs and start thinking of myself beyond being an athlete. So one of the things I did, I sat down with actually people who work within our English Institute of Sport called Performance Lifestyle Advisors, who was brilliant at just talking me through what I might be interested in. Let's write a CV. And I went through that horrible thing of thinking, I've got nothing to put on a CV. I've sat in a boat going backwards for 20 years. That doesn't fill up many lines. And, they were brilliant at just drawing out some of the nuances that you the skills that you acquire when you're an athlete. And so I became a bit more confident writing my CV, and then I thought I need to apply for a job now with the CV I've got. And I actually got an email from someone saying, "Oh, have you seen that the chair of UK Sport is, the application's out for that role?" And I said, "Oh, I hadn't seen it, and that's interesting. I don't quite know why you're telling me." And then there was a sort of, "Would you think about it?" message, and I thought, absolutely ridiculous. That is a big role in sport, and I'd sat on sort of charities and as a trustee and things, but I'd never really sat in a boardroom to that extent. So I kind of read through the job description and, usual thing. I thought, well, I tick some of the boxes. I could, but I just don't have that experience. I don't have that working knowledge of what that role would be. I really don't know what the role would be like. But, I need to make that step into thinking beyond being an athlete. So I will put my application in. I won't be successful and I won't even get to the interview round, but I'll put it in because almost I had to convince myself it was time to do something else. And almost applying for a job was the easiest way to convince myself that I definitely wouldn't be getting back in a boat, or I shouldn't be getting back in a boat. Then I got asked for interview and I thought, well, this is brilliant. I'll practice going through interview techniques and that's a really good lesson as well to get myself into the world of work. Still absolutely sure I wouldn't get offered it, and then got sort of probably the scare of my life when I was then phoned up by the Minister of Sport at the time to be offered it. And if I'm honest, went into a bit of panic about whether or not I should then accept, because I didn't really know what the job would be. So I was, I probably was one of those people who went through, really enjoyed the process because I wasn't thinking I will get it, or there's so much pressure on the process. I really enjoyed. By the end of the interview, I remember thinking, whoever gets this is really lucky. I'd love this job. So I'm really, I did have this slight dilemma whether or not I should accept, but I'm thrilled I accepted. I'm in 5 years in. I love it. It's hard, it's challenging, it's demanding, but I absolutely love the work.
And being chair, Katherine, is more than just a figurehead, isn't it? It's a lot more than that.
Oh yes. If I was a figurehead, I could do a lot of other things in my life. This seems to sort of dominate everything I do. Obviously, the main job is you chair a board, and the board makes incredibly important decisions about the future direction of Olympic and Paralympic sport in this country. Huge investment decisions, which carry a lot of. I'm very lucky. I've got an outstanding board, and they really take the responsibility seriously. They really realise the impacts of investment or not investing in sports and in events and the impact it can have. And so I work with extraordinarily impressive people, which helps both in the executive and the non-executive side. And I think there's lots about it that reminds me of being an athlete. It still feels like it's a performance world. It's problem solving, it's making decisions, it matters. It's got a real purpose that sits within it, and people are so committed and so, really, we've got amazing people who work in the organization who really, really, believe in the power of positivity that sport can have, and they really work incredibly hard. So I think that, I thought when I left being an athlete, I would never be in that environment again. And yet it surprises me in an organization like this. I think there's so many similarities of incredibly impressive people working so hard every day to try and make things better for something they believe in strongly, and that's an environment I thrive in. So it's the board itself, but it's also, I'm pretty hands-on within the organization as well. Work very closely with the senior team, but also, I'm lucky. It was the first office I'd ever worked in, and I actually love walking in and just meeting people and talking to people about their roles and what they do, and learning how the organization works from the ground up, and seeing where I can, be helpful, and equally learning how not to be involved and not be helpful. So, like I said, it's been an amazing learning curve, but the variety of the day-to-day work is incredible.
Two-part question, if I may. You said you are loving it. You're still enjoying it since 2017. So what has been your biggest success at UK Sport as chair? And then a wider question. What is UK Sport's biggest success?
My own success, on a very personal level, I think one of the biggest, earliest challenges was how, and I think every athlete goes this, how you will adjust from being an athlete to being a normal person, I'll call it, because it's, working in a job. And I didn't know how easy or not that transition would be, emotionally as much as anything else. So like I said, because the environment I enjoy so much and is quite familiar in a lot of ways, I found the adjustment probably easier than I expected. So in a way, a personal success is having been able to leave behind that world as an athlete and yet find something equally as rewarding and challenging and satisfying. So that was a big success. From a professional point of view, I know when I first came in, there was a lot of challenges to the system. There was a lot of challenges around sort of the culture of high performance sport, but also about the investment decisions. And there's a huge frustration by a lot of sports that we hadn't been able to afford to fund, in recent years. I think one of the early things, I sat down with Liz Nicholl, who was the chief exec at the time, and we kind of very deliberately wanted to hear from those sports. And I think it's, and like I said, all of this is massive learning, but I think it's easy when you're having a lot of criticism and challenge of the decisions you're making to still believe in them implicitly, but move ahead and sort of, not listen all the time. And I think we did a great job of sitting down with the sports and really listening to why people thought we'd made wrong decisions or unfair decisions. And I think creating that space and making sure UK sport was recognised as still having to make difficult decisions that would not please everyone, it didn't mean that UK sport wasn't willing to listen and willing to adjust to decisions or listen to people and change as and when it was needed. And I think that was really important. When Liz stepped down, I always knew she would as the chief exec within a couple of years. I remember the biggest pressure being told, not deliberately being told as a pressure, but saying the biggest thing a chair will ever do is replace your chief exec. Because in a way, the chief executive you choose will also sort of frame the future of that organisation and therefore what the organisation will do. And I start to laugh now, but I felt incredible responsibility on my shoulders during that time. It took quite a long time to go through the process. And I remember people from outside the organisation, people from inside the organisation, all talking about what a massive thing it was. Liz had been there for about 10 years. So it was a big change. And a lot of people saying, well, how important it was. But I'm sure you'll get it right, Katherine. I'm sure you'll make the right decision. But you go through this sort of, what if I don't have the answers in front of me that I need? What if I can't find the right person? What if we can't, how do I know it's the right decision? And I worked with, and again, my board were incredible, supportive throughout it and were with me every step of the way. But it still feels ultimately as the chair, that sits at your door ultimately. So that felt a huge, and the first time doing it as well, that felt a very big moment. But I feel it's a success. We have Sally Mundy in now, and she's settled in, flying in the role and doing incredibly well. So I feel importantly, it also had to feel right. I think those leaders, the chief execs, have such influence internally and externally. So as much as how good they are, needs to be how well they handle people and situations. And I think that's really important to get right. And then also I was kind of overseeing the change of a new strategy kind of within the first few years I was here. It was just time. It was time we looked at the strategy and adjusted and changed for the future. And that again feels, this strategy will outlive me in my term at UK Sport. So you're signing up to something that will go on long beyond you and will genuinely affect the way that Olympic and Paralympic sport operates. So, I'm really, really proud of where we got to with that strategy, but it wasn't a simple process. It was challenging. We had to go around it so many times to make sure we have it right. Even now, it will still get challenged when things are hard. And, I think that's when you have to really, if the process is right and you really believe in what you've done, then the challenges you can cope with. I think looking back on what's happened in those 5 years so far, I think there's a lot that, as an organisation, to be proud of.
A country in recession, a cost of living crisis, people needing to go to food banks in 2023, a creaking health system. Should elite sport, be cutting its cloth accordingly in terms of investment moving forward? Or do you have that pretty robust argument when you sit opposite the minister to say this is why you should continue to get the pot of money that you do?
It's a really good question, and the answer is probably both. I think we do have a really robust reason why sport matters in people's life, why it's important. Even watching some of the recent events, 2022 felt like it was the first year post-COVID that we saw some incredible major events happening, whether it was the Women's Euros, hosting the UK, or the World Cup over in Qatar, or the Rugby League World Cup that happened, gymnastics championships. Some incredible sporting events happened domestically and globally. And I think you sensed, especially when it happened in the UK, you sensed the positivity come back and the unity of people coming together to really celebrate something very special. So I think sport has a very important role to play in society. I think it alongside arts, culture, there's so many things in our society that matter to people and that we need to protect and promote, especially when things are hard. But at the same time, we don't sit in a sort of, protected bubble. We're very aware of what's happening, and every sport we work with has felt that cost of living crisis hit. Whether it's restrictions now on how much people can afford to travel or to fly or to compete in countries, whether it's the day-to-day living of athletes, which is obviously going up constantly, and yet we're not going to get more money. We're very aware right now the country is struggling with budgets, so we're not going to find more money. In fact, even if we continue, we've been very, very well supported by the government, and I hope we will continue to be, but it doesn't mean it'll increase. So even if we get the same fantastic support, with inflation, with all the other rising costs, it's going to feel like we have less. So sport inevitably will have to cut its cloth like everyone else is doing at the same time. So it's probably a mixed answer of we will cut our cloth because we have to, but I would argue, to my last breath, that sport matters and sport should continue to matter in people's lives.
And when we see the medal moments at the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games, is there evidence that those medal moments then transfer to more participation, to a more robust grassroots system of sport, more children getting involved, for example?
We all have this assumption that when we see these incredible moments, then everyone's going to want to, pick a football or run out or get in the local swimming pool or go down to a local gym and get involved. And the stats are still hard. There's not quite as close a causal link as we'd like to see in those areas. What we do know is that the success on those big stages do create inspiration. Some people will get involved in sport. Often people who are already doing sport will get more involved. So we can often make that link. Or we've also seen as people are inspired, not necessarily to do sport, but to do other things in their life. Because what you see when you're watching sport is you see people overcoming incredible obstacles and following their ambitions and their goals and their dreams. And a lot of that, it's a bit of a human spirit thing. So I know, even firsthand, speaking to people who have watched things as huge as the Olympics or the Paralympics and have changed something in their lives, which isn't necessarily meaning they're all going to then go down and join clubs and become superstar athletes themselves, but they have done something in their life that they are proud of and better for having done. So I think that inspirational effect is big. It's harder to measure, obviously, but it's important and it definitely exists. And I think what we're also seeing, one of the big changes, even since I finished competing, is we have got athletes who are so much more willing than probably ever before to use the platform they have to speak about issues that are very, very powerful and really matter to them. And that's, we did a sort of survey, and over 86% of the athletes funded through public funding through UK Sport want to in some way do something beyond their sport to have a positive impact on society. So, I think again, when the medals and the moments of success and the moments of personal best and these really, exciting, thrilling, spine-tingling memories that we all share, I think we increasingly see that as a springboard. So some will just be an end in themselves and that moment will live. But actually for a lot of athletes, they use that moment and that platform to do more with it. And it can be anything from, climate change to LGBT rights to gender inequality to racial things. There's so many different areas that really matter to athletes now. And I think they have a voice where they probably didn't feel they had one before. And that's been a big change.
We are talking to Katherine Grainger, Chair of UK Sport, the 50th guest on Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy, and we're honoured to have her on the show. We will be talking about your amazing rowing career, hopefully before the end of the podcast. But just a couple more questions. There's something you just brought up just there, and I thought it was relevant. And we don't really talk about football on this podcast, obviously, but there were protests or planned protests by the footballers of various nations, England and Wales being two of them, to wear pride captain's armbands at the World Cup. But FIFA really clamped down on that, and that didn't happen. How, as an organisation that works with these sporting federations, how do you change their minds moving forward? Or is it down to the athletes, like you say, to actually have the courage to do it themselves?
I think the interesting one with the sort of armbands you mentioned from Qatar was sort of how late in the day that seemed to come in. You know, I think on ideal world, you have those conversations before the event comes. You know, having been an athlete myself, the last thing you want is when the tournament's about to start, is those things still causing distractions and focus. And I think a lot of especially the sort of European football teams had already signed up to saying they'll wear the One Love armband, and the captains are very proud of that. And I think, you know, almost within hours of some of the matches kickoff, FIFA had come in not just with the "we'd prefer you not to," but if you do actually, I think most, from what I saw and read and heard, a lot of the teams would have been willing to take a fine. A lot of the organisations would have been, I know the FA were willing to take a fine for the captains wearing the armband. But when it came down to you could get a red card, or you could, you know, actually it would affect performance, then suddenly it felt there was a slightly different game being played. You know, I think the obviously the German team did their team photo with, you know, their mouths covered to show that they'd been silenced. And I think there's ways that athletes will still speak out. The frustration is when it looks like the athletes get penalised within the sport itself. I mean, that feels an unfair way to handle that discussion. So you feel, again, it's for people who are, you know, in someone, you know, it's the reason why the people in the senior leadership roles have that level of accountability, and they are expected to have those conversations. Ideally you want those conversations ahead of the moment when the sport actually starts, so that, you know, what needs to be said, where the discriminate. I mean, even the things like, I mean, the sports washing is always argued, but when the decisions are made about where events go to, I mean, that's the time for these conversations to happen. That's years in advance. And yet it seems to be the minutes before when it really sort of comes into focus. And I think that's when that's the frustration, because obviously that's when the media is watching, and that's has the most exposure. But I guess my frustration is if you see athletes being penalised for that moment, for saying something they feel strongly and they believe in, then it's somebody's got it wrong earlier down the road.
Well, let's hope those conversations are taking place with the Olympics ahead of Paris 2024, which is now obviously next year. Russia. The Olympics are manoeuvring in the background in Lausanne about trying to get Russian athletes back in for Paris 2024. And we know what's still going on in Ukraine. You were in Beijing when this all happened. And how close were the Paralympics to not happening, the Winter Paralympics in Beijing to actually not happening? And as a former Olympian, how would you, again, say to the IOC, what is the right way forward for them trying to go, well, we want to have some kind of Russian athletes involved in Paris 2024?
It's a great debate. And I think Beijing, the Winter Beijing Olympics last year was a brilliant example of the complexity of those decisions as well. I remember we'd had the Winter Olympics, although there were still issues. You know, we're talking about sort of politics coming to sport. You know, Beijing itself and China itself had come under a fair amount of criticism for hosting, regardless, because of areas around human rights. It had come and gone relatively smoothly. Then the Russian invasion happened to Ukraine, and then the Paralympics was due to start. So I remember going to Heathrow to fly out there and having a quite high-level meeting in a very bizarre room they'd had to find for us in a corner of Heathrow, with the Paralympic Association, some of the people from the British Paralympic Association who were flying out in the same flight that I was, with other members of UK Sport, but also with people who were already out in Beijing, because obviously the teams were out there. So some of the leaders from the teams who were in Beijing, including some of the members of the Paralympic Association out there, there was sort of government involvement. There was lots of different people in that call, and there was a sense of, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know. You know, we didn't know at what point our government would get involved as well and have requests of athletes at that point. We were trying to find out where the athletes were. We were trying to find out what was happening with the International Paralympic Committee and the decisions being made. And at the time, I remember getting on the flight, Russia were going to be competing. And we had quite a long flight, obviously, to Beijing. We didn't know what would happen by the time we'd landed, and we'd be having meetings straight away. And there was a risk we'd be turning around as soon as we got to the airport if decisions had been made to withdraw the team, and that was always an option. By the time we landed, within a couple of hours of landing, the IPC had reversed the decision, and Russia and Belarus were not going to be competing in the Paralympics. And I remember there was a huge relief from the British team, because there was a sense of, would some of the British athletes boycott the moment of competition when it came to it, especially where we knew there was Ukraine athletes who couldn't compete. So then to see Russian athletes competing would then feel uncomfortable. So the fact it all went ahead, and then I met some very senior members of the International Paralympic Committee. I remember saying to them, almost without thinking, it must feel good you've made the right decision now, because it sort of fit with a sense of the right thing. When you've got a country that like Russia invading Ukraine, then there should be consequences where you can find them. But the IPC were saying it just wasn't as simple as that. They didn't think they actually legally had the right to do it. They had gone back in their decision, but they were still worried it was the wrong decision. They felt they could be sued by Russia and it could bring down the whole International Paralympic Committee. But in addition to that, there were many countries, many global countries who didn't agree with the decision. And we were seeing it very much through Western eyes and interpretation. And there was a sort of pushback of why is, say, Britain feeling so strongly on this, where you didn't feel strongly on other invasions and other wars. And you suddenly, I felt quite naive, but you had the complexity of sort of global politics in sport being opened in front of you. And you realize that actually these decisions are far more difficult and far more complex than I think we can see from our side of the world in a way. So I think we're going to see it ongoing between now and next summer in Paris. I think there'll be very split views again. And there's always an argument of, do you try and should the athletes be the ones to suffer? Should the athletes be able to compete under a neutral flag? We've seen that in the past, although the neutral flag has never felt particularly neutral, because we will still see the Russian flag in stadiums. I've seen it myself in stadiums. You won't have the Russian national anthem necessarily, but you will still know these are Russian athletes, and the Russian athletes will often feel very proud of Russia. And we also know that sport is used as a showcase of a force of success and pride in that country. So, again, it feels very uncomfortable that a nation that is at war could still be celebrating sort of success on a global stage and showing that pride. So there's some real, I think, again, how do you talk to the IOC and the IPC and these people who make these decisions? I think people just, often countries come together, often the countries who feel similarly will come together and support it. But I think it's also, although many people say politics shouldn't be in sport, and I always come from that place, politics shouldn't be in sport, it feels when there are wars happening, you can't pretend sport can be immune to that. And I think you have to be very honest about the role it can and should play. But ideally, I think it's very hard when individual athletes get pulled into it, because I think often they unless they want to be, and sometimes they do, I feel like if they don't want to be involved in it, it's harsh when they get pulled into politics. And I'd sort of want to protect athletes on that level.
Is that because your background is as an athlete? So first and foremost, even though you're now the chair of an organisation, you would put yourself in the shoes of the person, the individual that's been training for 4 years to go to this event?
Yeah, I do. I'm as long as I can, although it's, every year passes, it's a year further from being an athlete. I did it for a lot longer than I've now been, say, in the role of the chair of UK sport. So I still have a lot of understanding of the athlete mentality. And I don't feel, I think sometimes there can be a criticism that athletes feel they kind of put their head in the sand and they just want to think about their sport and they don't want to think about. And that's not my experience. A lot of athletes are very, very aware of what's happening in the world and have huge concerns about what's happening in the world and feel frustrated at not being able to do more. But I feel almost strongly, unless they are comfortable in speaking out and using any platform they have, they shouldn't be asked to. And that's not their role. That's not what people get involved as an athlete in sport for. They've got a very clear role to do and a job to do. And unless they're willing to, they shouldn't be used on a political platform, because I think there's a lot of other people who are better placed to have those very high level, very political decisions. And if athletes don't want to get involved, I don't feel they should be pulled in.
A couple of lighter ones as we edge towards the end of Great British Bosses, our 50th episode with Katherine Grainger. So when you were going backwards in a boat, to use your phrase, at London 2012 with Anna Watkins, did you think a decade later that you two would end up with some of the biggest roles in British sport? You as chair of UK sport and Anna now the chief executive of the British Elite Athletes Association.
Most days we sat in the boat, loving every moment of playing on the water. I don't think we really thought about what might come next. But I remember us sitting in, I think it was like in Hyde Park. We had one summer we were sitting in these giant beanbags they put out in some of the parks for some random reason, and thinking, what would be sort of dream job and what would be ideal jobs. And it's fair to say we both were pretty ambitious in our sort of plans of what might come next. So on one level, yes, it's kind of strange and it's sort of and we'll meet up, professionally about the two roles we have now, kind of overlap. There's a lot of things in common between the two organizations that we're in touch with. So a lot of the time we're just talking about the business at hand, and then occasionally we'll have the moment of, oh my goodness, look where we got to now. But I'm certainly not surprised with Anna. I know I've always had, the most enormous respect for the person she is, the individual, the integrity she has, but the intelligence she has to match it. And it's just such a brilliant organization that needs someone who has that passion and experience and drive. And we've already seen her doing brilliant things. So I think the future's looking very bright.
Do you still row? And if you row these days, is it with a glass of wine in hand?
It's really hard to row with a glass of wine in hand, I'll tell you that. Not, I couldn't say I've tried, but no, I still row. I still, I get in a boat occasionally, and not as often as I'd probably like to, but I do it, and I've still got some amazing. I mean, one of the best things you get from sport is your friendships. That is untouchable, and people that I rowed with internationally, and we still have that very immediate, very easy connection. We've got incredible sort of shared history, and we don't talk about the shared history. You talk now about everyone's day-to-day lives and the challenges we're all living with in real life. But we get in a boat, and it's, the years do fall away, and we know how to make a boat feel good, and we still are more competitive than we should be. And it's like I think there's something very, just a physical act of pushing away from the bank, and you kind of leave everything behind. And for that time in your boat, that's all you're thinking about, and that's all you're enjoying. So it's a real escape for me when I do it now.
That gold in London, the silver medals in Sydney, Athens, Beijing and Rio, 6 times world champion. Do you have a favourite race?
Well, yes, I do. It's the obvious one, to be honest. It's hard. I was really lucky. I had a very, very long career. I enjoyed the vast majority of it. I really did. And I loved racing. So all the big events, the World Championships, the Olympic Games, the World Cups, I do it all again in a heartbeat. I absolutely adored it. But you cannot, I'd struggle to find a way to top the final in London 2012. You said at the beginning, it was such a special summer. It wasn't just the race, it was a race within that event, within the Olympics itself, within the summer that Britain enjoyed. And there were so many positives that summer was surrounded by. Even now, we're like over 10 years on now, and I still regularly meet people who have some very treasured memory or feeling of that summer. And so to be an athlete at the heart of that was such a privilege. It really was.
And where does that drive come from, Katherine? Does it come from the Glasgow roots? Or where does it come from?
Probably impossible to pin down a play. That drive is a bit of everything of you, isn't it? It's my family, my parents, my background. I'm sure a bit of a Glaswegian great going on there. The people that surround me throughout my career. Yeah, I don't know where it came. I couldn't isolate where it came from, but I'm very glad I've got it, and I think I keep it, and it does help me day to day. And I think it probably gets honed. I think it probably helps if you have it initially when you start as an athlete, but over the years as an athlete, it gets honed and honed. So you are constantly, everything about an athlete is improvement. It's always about finding where you can do things better and learning and improving and better. And actually, that's just a very helpful fundamental basis for other things in life as well. It's a really simple way, but it's all about reviewing, understanding, finding where it can be better and trying it again, doing it over and over again. So I think those skills, that the drive that was there initially got improved as an athlete, and I get to now benefit from that now, I have to say.
So let's look ahead to next year. Paris 2024, the Olympic Games, the Paralympic Games. It's always an exciting hurtle towards the big events. What is the shape then of sport in this country? How will Team GB and Paralympics GB do? We keep hearing from people, it's another home games. Is there going to be another home games bounce, for example?
It's an interesting one. There's a real split on this feeling of it's another home games. I think the important thing to remember, it's the first time since London 2012 that the games are coming back to Europe. So it is the first time in a long time that we will be, in our own time zone, that we will be almost, sort of within our own climate. So I think the mixture of, there'll be an advantage for athletes to it'll be more familiar, it'll be more accessible. The crowds they'll be easier to have home support traveling and things when it's just across the water. And I think there's lots of things that athletes can absolutely turn to their advantage, which will be thrilling and exciting. And also from a public point of view, I think we will have, I think a lot of people will either make the journey to Paris or be able to watch at home very, very easily. It'll be very accessible. And I think the time zone makes an enormous difference. So I think there'll be a huge advantage in that, but I think we shouldn't get overconfident. It won't be a complete home games. It's France's home games. We're just going to be just neighbours popping over. So I think you can turn a lot of advantages. I think definitely there'll be a lot of things we can turn to our advantage, but I think there'll be no complacency either, in that it will still be an immense challenge that people want to get right. I think, the shape we're in is good. I think it was hard to know how Tokyo was going to go after the pandemic, and still probably within the pandemic, if we're honest. This will feel the first games, I think, hopefully, if nothing happens the next year, where it feels sort of back to what we're more familiar with. But we'll have athletes who haven't experienced that before. We'll have athletes who, have only been around post sort of the Rio Games, and therefore haven't really experienced that sort of showcase that it is. We've seen phenomenal success. For example, our cycling teams, both Olympic and Paralympic, have had extraordinary results in sort of recent championships. I was lucky enough to get to the World Gymnastics Championships last year. It was hosted in Liverpool. We had incredible results there as well, which meant the teams qualified early for the games, which is a massive advantage. My own sport of rowing really kind of, after a sort of lower point than familiar in Tokyo, really bounced back incredibly well last summer. So that's exciting to see where that goes next. Again, Olympic and Paralympic alike. We've had, for the first time ever, we've had our judo. We've had 2 athletes who have topped the world rankings in 2 different weight categories. We've got, athletics is always going to sort of light up track and field, and we've got some big names who have had incredible stories alongside them as well. I think people really, going back to sort of Birmingham and the Commonwealth Games, there's some amazing sort of stories there, with Laura Muir doing her bit, and then McColgan mother-daughter combination, really things that engage people. So it's not just the incredible results, but the performances and what sits behind them are very powerful. And I think we will see all of that come Paris. And again, we've got some new sports, the newer sports we had in Tokyo with the climbing and the surfing and skateboarding, drew a lot of new audience members. And we've got breaking coming to Paris, which a lot of people haven't quite got their head around. So, seeing a very different style sport will be exciting. So I think I'm very optimistic about how the team can do. And I think having it in Paris will be a big lift for a lot of people. But I also think it'll be a big one for our public. I think the British public will really get behind it and be really excited to be part of it again.
So expect to see Great Britain and Northern Ireland right up there on the medal tables at both games?
Yeah, I think the wonderful thing is, I don't think, certainly from my experience, it's not like ambition has, because we've been successful for a very long time, and that's largely part to the investment of the National Lottery. And the wonderful thing, and I can say this as an athlete who was funded by the lottery for many years, you are very aware that's public buying tickets has enabled us to do this stuff. And so the Olympics, the Paralympics is almost the give back. You want the public to enjoy it and be thrilled by it. And although we've had many games now of really quite extraordinary success, I don't meet any athletes now who are sort of feeling, that was the glorious past. Every single new coach, new performance director, new athletes, people who work incredible, whether it's psychologists or physiologists or physiotherapists or nutritionists, their time is now, and they want it to be the best time they've ever seen. So part of UK sports ambition is, the greatest decade yet of sporting moments is because we think that there is so much more to come. Even without home games, there is so much more to come from sort of that incredible community of athletes and staff and sports we have.
Well, it's a great way to start the year. You've got us excited ahead of next summer already. Dame Katherine Grainger, Chair of UK Sport, thank you so much for talking to Great British Bosses.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you both.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.